All right, class, what's up? Here we go. First lecture of the semester. Allow me to introduce myself. I am a professor, Isaac Ceniceros. That is my cat right there. She goes by a bunch of names, but she don't really matter because she never responds to any of them. And that right there is my doggo, little Reggie. He'll be here for the majority of our lectures, as will probably the cat if she's not out there hiding around somewhere. But anyways, this is not why you were watching the video. The video, of course, as to why you're watching is to get an in-depth understanding, hopefully at least in-depth understanding, of the wild and beautiful world that is philosophy. So, without further ado, let's just get right into it. For those of you who are following along on the lecture slide, I am on the PowerPoint slide, that is, I am on the slide, the very first slide, why study philosophy? Subtext on confronting the absurd, because that is the stated goal for today's lecture, confronting the absurdity and using philosophy as a means by which to address it. So, before we do so, the next slide here, we got to ask ourselves a couple of quick questions, because that is, after all, what philosophy is. For those of you who took this class hoping that you would be able to gain some understanding, maybe even some answers that you have about life, I hate to be the ones to disappoint you, but I'll let you know now in advance that in philosophy there are very few answers and very, very, very many questions, okay? We could spend an entire course just examining one question out of this list, right? And this list is by no means to say that it's at all inclusive. There are so many other questions that we're not even going to be addressing in this particular lecture series, let alone this particular semester. For me personally, I've chosen these key questions in philosophy with a very stated purpose, okay? And that purpose for me personally is to try to utilize the material that we learn, that you learn in this class, to apply it in a practical manner in your own personal life, right? So with that in mind, I chose these 5 questions for that very stated purpose, okay? The first question is, of course, for those of you who are following along with the PowerPoint slide, I'm pointing this way because that's where my other computer is what even is consciousness, okay? If you go down to a couple slides down, you'll see a slide here, a little meme that I put into the picture here. It's the picture of when you exist all of a sudden, right? The meme of this little baby looking at his mom with that weird little stank face on their faces, and the baby's like, what is this? What is this being, right? That's kind of what we're talking about here when we're discussing the nature of consciousness. Like, what is consciousness? We recognize, for instance, that the universe itself is pretty old, right? It's quite old. By all measures, at least this particular universe, there might be multiple, there might be infinitely many. You know, who knows? We know for sure that at least this one, at least as we start discussing later, other philosophers such as Descartes, don't worry, they're fine. Other philosophers such as Descartes who's going to make us question things like, how do I even know I'm here on Earth, right? So we say this universe, like, yeah, we'll say this universe. We recognize that it's at least 14 billion years old, right? And in those 14 billion years, we recognize that the Earth in which we reside is about 6 billion years old, okay? Now, I don't know about you, but me personally, I'm 31. So I know that in those 14 billion years that the universe has been in existence, and in the 6 billion years that the Earth has been in existence, I have only been conscious for 31 of them, right? Where I was before this happened, where I will go after this happens, I have no idea. All I know is that I am here now, and I have absolutely zero clue still to this day of what exactly all of this is, right? So that's one pressing question that we're going to be asking, we're going to be concerning ourselves with throughout this semester, is what exactly is consciousness? Now, of course, we're not going to come anywhere near developing an answer for this question. This is a complex question that has baffled scientists throughout the whole history of mankind, right? And unless you are that dope philosopher or scientist that's going to come along and answer it, I know me personally, I'm not. The best that I can do is give you insight as to what other philosophers have come up with as to what they believe consciousness is, whatever this experience is, right? The next question that we're going to be confronting throughout the course of the semester is, does God exist, right? This is a huge question in the field of philosophy. It's a huge question in science. It's a huge question in our lives on a daily basis. Now, whether we actively confront this question or not is a completely different story. We recognize that religion in general and the belief in God thereof has played a pivotal role in influencing the construction of all of our identities. Again, whether you were raised religious or not, it's completely irrelevant. Just take, for example, for any of you who went down to Winterland here in El Paso, assuming that the majority of you are here in El Paso to begin with, right? I know before I get some students that were as far away as Tennessee and all those kinds of places, right? But if you were here in El Paso, and if you had a chance to go down to Winterland, down in downtown El Paso, you may have seen some of the nativity scenes, right? So you could have been raised entirely irreligious, have no belief in God whatsoever, and yet the religion would have been right there for you, to partake in, or not partake in necessarily, but it would have been there for you to, it would have been a part of your life, okay? And that's just a simple way. A larger way it can be a part of your life is seeing what's going on, for example, right now in the White House with the debate, for example, over women's reproductive rights. A lot of those issues stem directly from the religious fundamentalist beliefs that, procreation is should not be for recreation, okay? And you should only, if you're gonna, engage in the act of making babies, if you will, right? It should only be with the intention of making a child, and any sexual activity that isn't for that stated purpose should not be allowed. And thus, we get into the issues of reproductive rights. You shouldn't need birth control, for instance, for one, because you should only be having sex to procreate. For two, because it's naturally interfering with the process of making these babies, right? So it's this religion, it plays a pivotal role in our lives, again, whether we recognize it or not. As we get later into the semester, in about our third lecture, we're going to discuss the various ways in which our rhetoric is co-opted and in which it's used against us in the form of logical fallacies. And one of the fallacies that we're going to examine is by our dear president, Donald Trump, right? And how before becoming the president, he utilized the religion, the religious base here in the United States of America as a means by which to garner support amongst his voting base, right? So again, and that's just from the religious aspect in terms of whether or not God exists, right? We're also going to examine it for the actual implications of whether God exists or not, right? Again, we're going to get deeper into this as the semester progresses, but just for now, as a quick boom, as a quick introduction, there's really two implications of God's existence, with each with their own separate set of consequences. We could say, for example, that God does exist, and the beauty in God existing is that, hey, God exists, your life has a purpose, your life has a meaning, your life has a value. You will know exactly what happens after you die, because you are going to heaven, the respective heaven of whatever God you believe in. Again, pointing to this PowerPoint slides here, because we recognize there's quite a bit of religions all around the world, right? And if God exists, well, ideally, they'll be there waiting for you, okay? Conversely, if God doesn't exist, well, then everything of what I just said is the exact opposite. Life doesn't have any meaning. Life doesn't have any value. And it may very well be purposeless, that we are just here by accident and there is no reason to our existing, right? Now, the natural inclination is to take this personal answer to be somewhat in a negative response, right? We say to ourselves, dang, there's no life, there's no meaning to life, there's no purpose, I'm here for nothing, right? For many people, this can in fact be a negative thing, but for others, it's taken as a great positive. You say to yourself, if there's no meaning to life, then that means I can make of my life whatever I desire. And anything that I do in my life ultimately won't matter, because if the universe is meaningless, if life is meaningless, it doesn't matter whether I become a doctor or a lawyer, or if I turn out to be a drifter. It's all, in the end, it's all meaningless, right? So I can go off and do whatever it is that I want, right? So that's one of the more positive implications of God's non-existence. As far as a negative connotation of God's existence, we recognize, for instance, that if God does exist, yes, your life has meaning, your life has purpose. But what if you don't like the meaning, or you don't like the purpose of your life, right? A common example I like to give, for instance, is imagine what it must have been like being a soldier throughout the entire course of history, okay? And just a random soldier, an unfortunate soldier who was, whose purpose in life was to be nothing more than quote unquote cannon fodder, if you will, right? I don't know about you, but me personally, that pains my heart just thinking of all these people who their purpose in life would have been nothing more than to take a bullet for a cause that, 400, 500, 350 years ago ultimately means nothing to us here in this present day. Now, of course, the argument can be made that unless they had made that sacrifice, we wouldn't be here today. But, it may very well be that that sacrifice was made in vain, because there ultimately is no purpose. The idea here being is that if your life has a purpose, it may not very well be a good purpose, right? Moreover, consider the fact that what if your purpose in life is to be a murderer or a rapist or a thief, right? And you don't want to be a murderer or a rapist or a thief. And yet, if, this godlike existence, this godlike entity does in fact exist, and you do in fact have a purpose that has been given to you by this godlike entity, well, then you don't really have a choice in the matter. You kind of have to become that rapist, murderer, thief, right? And then, of course, cycling down here to the next slide is, the next question rather is, why act morally then? If God, again, this works in one of two ways. The first way is, if God does exist, and God did in fact predetermine my path of behavior, how can I possibly be punished for becoming the rapist, the murderer, the thief, etc., if it was God's plan for me to become that very person? And conversely, we run into the problem of, if God doesn't exist, well, realistically, what is keeping me from, murdering people, from torturing people, etc., right? We might want to say something along the lines of, well, it's the law that's keeping you from doing that. But realistically, we recognize then, if that's the case, then we're more afraid of the consequences than there is any reason as to why we're not torturing people or murdering people, etc., right? And ideally, that makes for very shaky grounds to stand on, because you look around at all the people that you're surrounded with and you say, are you really only not trying to murder me right now because you're afraid of going to jail? And in the absence of a God's existence, it may very well be the case that the answer is a resounding yes, right? So following along here, the quotes that we have here for our slide on morality, there's three in particular that we're going to be concerning ourselves with. The first of which, they're not in no particular order in the slide, right? But the first quote goes along the lines of, it's from the brothers Karamazov from Fyodor Dostoevsky, right? There's a lot of weird words for me to say. I'm not used to saying those words. But the quote says, if God is dead, then all things are permissible, okay? And the idea here, again, is just exactly what we're talking about. If there is no godlike entity to keep you from engaging in any sort of maleficent behavior, well, damn, you can really do anything you want, realistically, right? The next two quotes are very closely related. The first of which being, God is dead, and we killed him, by Friedrich Nietzsche, right? Now, the idea here with Nietzsche is one that's going to be of paramount concern for us throughout the course of the semester. And what it essentially is the confrontation with the nihilism that emerges from recognizing that a God does not exist. The nihilism here being this idea that nothing matters. If God doesn't exist, then we recognize that our existence is pretty much arbitrary and contingent and ultimately meaningless, right? Many people get this impression that Nietzsche was welcoming of this it's a false impression that Nietzsche was welcoming of this nihilism, but in fact he was more so warning us of it, right? This idea that, we once had it so great and beautiful. And again, we're going to get deeper into this as the semester progresses. Just a quick introduction, but the idea here is that we once had it so great and beautiful when we were convinced that we were the only entities, that we were the chief concern of a godlike entity, that the universe revolved around us. And then science came along and kind of crashed the party, right? Which leads us to our third quote here from Neil deGrasse Tyson, which says, the good thing about science is that it's true whether or not you believe in it. Now, as much as you personally may not agree with it, the fact of the matter is we have no tangible proof of God's existence from a scientific perspective. And as far as we're concerned as philosophers and as, scientists who stem from the field of philosophy, the only way you can actually believe in something logically is to have proof for it. But it seems to be the case that the more science advances, the less and less reason we have to believe that God does in fact exist. So if this is the case, we are left once again to confront that nihilism of recognizing that, we, infinitely small people compared to the vastness of the universe, may very well be a complete mistake and have absolutely no purpose in life whatsoever, right? So this question on morality it's deeply rooted on our previous question of the existence of God, right? We recognize then that the value of God's existence in our life, it plays a critical role. Again, whether or not you believe is entirely irrelevant. It still is going to impact you in one way, shape, or another, right? Think about it. I mean, if you're a religious person, it's going to impact you in the sense that you have to you don't have to do anything you want to, but these ideas are definitely they're going to ruminate in your head, and they're going to make you ideally make the connections that other people before you have made, and that is, well, what reason do I have to believe in God? And if God doesn't exist, what is going to happen to me if not everything that I thought was going to happen to me after I do perish, right? Conversely, if you're an atheist, you might be, patting your chest and be like, I knew God didn't exist, right? But then you also have to confront the daunting, sobering reality that, yeah, God really doesn't exist. So this right here is all there is. And what came before and what came after, I have no idea, and neither does anybody else, but we do know that we are heading there every single day, right? And we have to confront that, recognizing that, the life that we live up to that point may or may not be a good one, may not be it just may not be anything, it might just be completely meaningless, okay? The next question, on the value of life, right? We're going to be covering this question from multiple different perspectives throughout the course of the semester. As you can tell here by the slide that I've already inserted, we're going to confront it from the political perspective, right? We're going to ask ourselves, do all lives matter, right? Do some lives matter than most? We have here the Black Lives Matter protester standing next to an All Lives Matter protester, right? And if you ask the Black Lives Matter protester, they're going to say, nope, some lives here in the United States of America and maybe over the world over do in fact matter more than others. Namely, they're going to be speaking of the lives of white males and females, for instance, right? Whereas the gentleman standing next to the Black Lives Matter protester is going to come along and say, no, all lives matter. And by saying that Black Lives Matter, you're assuming that Black lives matter more than other lives, right? And then you have my personal favorite, the death metal guy. Now I say personal favorite, I don't mean to bias the course any, but it's going to be pretty hard to conceal my deep-seated misanthropy as the semester progresses. Misanthropy here, for those of you who are entirely uninitiated, is the hatred for humanity. Now I assure you my hatred actually stems from a love for humanity, right? It's more of an anger towards humanity that we're going to be examining in great detail as the semester progresses. The anger being specifically the unwillingness of humanity to recognize their infinitely great potential. So that's, where mine comes from, right? The misanthropy then comes from saying like, no, you're capable of so much more. Why are you only settling for the bare minimum when we can be great beings? Humans, we can all be great and amazing, right? But you have to be willing to not settle for less, okay? Then you have the no lives matter guy coming through, which in reality, kind of encompasses everything that we were just talking about, from the universe, from the nature of consciousness to the nature of God's existence to the nature of morality. If we're being honest here, we recognize that if humans are in fact the highest achievement in life and being and existing, then we are the litmus test for all of creation. And if that's the case, we recognize that we're limited to this planet Earth. We're not, there's really, okay, I'll be very careful with these words. We are special, but we're not special at the same time, right? We recognize that if we were to vanish without a trace, say, God forbid, any sort of nuclear war were to break out, or which I very highly doubt it will. That cat is really tripping me out. Hopefully she's not disturbing you. Any sort of nuclear war, or maybe the sun exploding and taking any trace of us with it, then that's it. Nothing will ever know otherwise that we existed, okay? We won't leave any trace of us behind, and we will be just another entity that was lost in the infinite vastness that is the void of space, right? At the same time, though, we are pretty special in the sense that, we're the only ones that have everything that we have. Look at my cat, doesn't have clothes, my dog doesn't have a cell phone, etc., etc. And unless we make contact with an even more advanced human, or not even human, but alien extraterrestrial civilization, we recognize that in the vastness of the universe, we were the ones that came along and recognized it first, right? Or last, either way. So again, on the value of life, is life even value? Is it intrinsically valuable? And as we're going to see here shortly, what is the point, the meaning of life if it isn't? Okay, so the last question that we have that's going to be permeating our lectures throughout the course of the semester is, why study philosophy? Now, realistically, I want you to be honest with yourself. I wish you could be honest with me, but obviously one-way communication here. But you're always welcome to text me or email me if you're so inclined. But realistically, be honest with yourself. Ask yourself, what am I doing studying a philosophy course? Maybe you're a high school student right now and you don't have a choice because your parents enrolled you in the program and they said, you will take this course because I am telling you to. Or maybe you're not a high school student, maybe you're a college student and you're taking this course because society has come along and said, you will take this course because I am telling you to, and if you don't take it, you won't get a degree, and if you don't get a degree, you won't get that job you want, and if you don't get that job you want, you won't be able to buy all the things we told you to buy. All the things that I have here around my house too. I'm every bit as guilty of it as you are, right? So we ask ourselves, aside from that, why are we studying philosophy? What purpose does this serve in my life? You might be thinking to yourself, philosophy is stupid. I'm never going to study philosophy in my entire life, right? It's going back to that meme on the third or fourth or fifth slide, one of those slides in the beginning, right? It's talking about the most woke individual, if you will, is the one who never gives an F, right? And keep it as politically correct as possible, okay? About philosophy in their entire life, okay? You might be one of them. You might be saying to yourself, philosophy is stupid. I'm just here to get the grade and get on. Okay, maybe, right? Or maybe philosophy is actually pretty important. And maybe philosophy will help you confront many of the issues that you've had in your life that you didn't even know were issues, right? I know that's the stated goal for my class. I just told you this at the beginning of the semester. It's going to be my goal throughout the entirety of the semester to impress upon you the ways in which philosophy can genuinely impact us in a positive way. Now, for those of you who've already looked through the PowerPoint slide, you'll see that for me personally, the issue of the worth and value that people have of their lives is of critical importance. Me personally, I think life is beautiful. I think life is awesome. But we would be remiss and we would be lying to ourselves if we were to say that everybody feels the same. There are, in fact, millions of people around the world. In fact, there may be some of you watching this lecture right now who feel entirely indifferent. You feel completely different than the way I do. You might be saying to yourself, life is terrible, life sucks, I don't like living, etc., etc. To which not only does my heart break, but I also firmly, truly believe that philosophy can help you overcome and help the millions of people over the world overcome many of these thoughts. Not to say that it's the only way to overcome it or that it's the standalone way to do so. You know, psychological care is hugely important in doing so. You know, taking the prescription medications if you're so inclined, exercising, eating healthily, all that stuff is critically important. But it's my genuine conviction that philosophy, on top of all of that, can also help people. Even the ones that don't realize, that don't accept, that don't embrace the fact that, yeah, you know what, I'm not very happy with who I am, with how life is, etc. You might be under the delusion, for instance, that everything is beautiful. And as the semester progresses, you're going to come to realize, like, damn, I didn't even realize I had these many problems. Okay? And that's a great thing. It's a beautiful thing because we're going to see here shortly, in confronting these problems, we allow ourselves to overcome. We allow ourselves to heal. We allow ourselves, most importantly, to recover our existence from the infinitely many forces out there that seek to marginalize us, that seeks to tell us, no, you're not worthy, you are not important, you are not anything more than a worker, a student, an X, a Y, or a Z, right? And it's my firm conviction that philosophy can help us recover and see otherwise, right? So, with that in mind, we get to the next slide here. So for those of you who are following along, we have the slide here that says, when you're suddenly hit with dark thoughts about how pointless and short life is, right? And it's got a picture of Albert Camus underneath it with a big smile on his face, right? The philosopher that we're going to use to introduce ourselves to the semester is, in fact, this gentleman, Albert Camus, and his work in the book called The Myth of Sisyphus, right? Now, The Myth of Sisyphus is essentially, it's a treatise on suicide, okay? Now, contrary to what that statement may lead many to believe, it's a treatise as to why people should not commit suicide, okay? The whole point of the Myth of Sisyphus is to get people to understand that, yes, life may very well be, and if you're following the Camusian thought pattern, you're going to say, yeah, it's not may very well. It absolutely is meaningless. It absolutely is purposeless. It absolutely has no meaning or purpose whatsoever to it. And yet we as individuals try every single day to ascribe meaning and purpose to an otherwise uncaring universe. This is what he refers to as the absurd, the absurdity of existence. We have the meme here of it's either Patty or Selma from The Simpsons, right? Smoking the big stack of cigarettes, and on the cigarettes it says the conflict between the human tendency to seek inherent value and meaning in life and humans' inability to find any. This is the definition of the absurdity of existence for Camusian philosophy. The realization that anything that we do may very well be of nil importance in the grand scape of the universe, right? And yet we still, for some reason, get up every day to go work out, to go, to the gym. The gym plays a pretty pivotal role in my life, apparently. I just said it twice. To go work out, to go to school, to go to work, to engage in the relationship, to root for our sports team, knowing who doesn't matter who wins the Super Bowl, someone else is going to win next year, and at the end of the day, everyone's going to die, no one's even going to remember who played in the Super Bowl, etc., right? Now, with this absurdity, then, we realize that, if you just give me 1 second here, according to Camus, what he's going to want to tell us is that the principal question of philosophy is only ever concerned with whether or not we should kill ourselves, right? Whether we as an individual should kill ourselves. We recognize, why would you want to continue living in a universe that is meaningless and purposeless? Now, again, I cannot emphasize this enough. This is not an invitation to do so, right? And if you were to do so and say, it's my philosophy teacher's fault, I'd say, no, you mistook the philosophy. You mistook the point of the lecture. Again, Camus is saying reasons why we shouldn't kill ourselves, why we in fact should live. He's going to, in fact, to take it even deeper, we're just jump right into the deep end. These existential philosophers are going to argue along the lines of, realistically, the majority of us aren't even living in the first place, right? One of the beautiful things about animals is the companionship that they offer, right? They're beautiful, there's no doubt about it, okay? But realistically speaking, we recognize that these animals, they have a very base level existence. Their entire existence is predicated off their instinctual drive for survival, whether it be to reproduce, to eat, sleep, whatever the case might be. They are pretty limited in their scope of what they are capable of, right? We recognize, though, that humans, we're no different. We're animals ourselves. Despite our tendency to look at ourselves as somehow different from the natural world, we are every bit an animal as this cat sitting in my lap or this dog staring intently at me, trying to understand the nature of reality through the words that I speak, right? Do you understand what I'm saying? I'll take that as a no, right? We recognize that we're like these animals right here, okay? And that unless we've taken the time to reflect and to examine our behaviors on a daily basis, the chances are that we live a life remarkably similar to that of an animal. That is to say, the majority of us are mostly concerned with eating, sleeping, reproducing, etc. Okay? To which case, Camus is going to want to come along and say, well, what's the point of that? What fulfillment do you get from that? Why would you want to continuously continue? Why would you want to live this life until, this life of perceived meaninglessness until it's time to die? Why not just end it now? He's going to want to argue, okay? More specifically, he's going to ask, is there any reason not to commit suicide? Okay? Again, this goes back straight to the intrinsic value of life, right? If life is intrinsically valuable, you'd say, no, you can't commit suicide. Life is beautiful. Life is valuable, etc., etc. But what if it's not? What if life is not beautiful? What if life is not meaningful? What if life has no purpose, if it's not valuable, etc.? What reason do you not have to do so? Camus wants to argue, okay? What he's going to want to tell us, Camus, is he believes that this question arises when a person stops deceiving themselves and begins to see the world without preconceived illusions of what it really is, okay? He's going to want to argue, Camus, that many people, they live their lives and they die without ever seeing things as they actually are, okay? Without ever seeing the world as it actually is. Now, this idea of our inability to see the world for what it really is, it's going to be a recurring theme that we cover throughout the semester. We're introducing it here today with Camus, and his ideas are more predicated on our beliefs, on the thought patterns that we have as people, our cultural, the way we've been socialized, socialization here being the process of learning and repeating culture, okay? Just make sure to jot that one down, okay? The way we've been socialized to believe that the world is. He's going to want to say, if we've never even paused to consider this, right? We'll never even be able to see what the world truly is. Later on in the semester, maybe in about 4 or 5 lectures when we start covering Plato, they're going to take it a step further and say, how do you even know that the senses that you have are adequately relaying to you the external world that exists outside of our minds, right? You don't even have, how do we know that the way the world is being interpreted by our brains is even the way that the world actually is, right? So again, it's going to be a recurring theme about seeing things the way they truly are that we cover throughout the course of the semester, okay? As far as Camus' iteration is concerned, he's, again, more concerned with our beliefs and the way we've been socialized. Camus is going to want to argue again that instead of seeing what he refers to as the tragic nature of life, that instead we waste our life in what he refers to as stupid self-confidence. What he means by this stupid self-confidence is that despite the fact that we spend our lives in near or even perhaps in absolute despair in this absurd world that continuously frustrates our true human needs, we mask this fact. We mask this fact. A little tongue twister there, right? We mask this fact with forced optimism, he's going to want to tell us. Now, this forced optimism, if we deconstruct it a little bit more, we're going to realize that it can manifest itself in various ways. Whether it be rooting for your favorite sports team, irrespective of what sport it is, right? Whether it be staying in an unfruitful relationship or job, concerning yourself with inconsequential events that you have no control over, that have no bearing on your life whatsoever, right? Whether it be taking a class for no other reason than because it's a requirement, and so on, all right? This forced optimism dictates that we believe that doing so will ultimately be of importance, despite the fact that we recognize, as we just did with the absurd, either implicitly or tacitly is irrelevant, okay? Whether you conscientiously recognize it or not, it's not the point. We recognize that the universe, and ultimately our place in it, may very well be meaningless, okay? So, Camus is going to want to come along and argue then that the more profitable, quote unquote profitable, such false optimism is, the more entrenched one becomes in it, the more entrenched that we personally become in it, right? So just consider, for instance, how many institutions there are that are readily available to sell you this false conception of happiness, the quick fixes, if you will, right? Now, whether it be in the form of a pill, the lifestyle, or a belief, okay, it doesn't matter. Consider how many of those institutions out there are just pandered to the masses on a daily basis, as opposed to how many of them are out there that are telling you that the only way to cure yourself from the general malice, if you will, that we all seem to experience as human beings is by confronting our inner demons. That by first confronting the void that we seem to have inside of us, that then we can pursue the happiness that it is that we desire. Obviously, right, this isn't by mistake. I mean, as Camus is going to argue, this self-deception has become the dominant mode of being for the majority of us. He's going to say, listen, the majority of us, we deceive ourselves on a daily basis on purpose, okay? And this in turn, it implies that the majority of us, according to Camus, are strangers to our very own selves, that we look in the mirror, for instance, okay? And that we genuinely have no clue who the person is staring back at us. At best, you have this person who's been socialized, who's been constructed, and whose entire identity has been created by the society in which they were born. What I mean by that, of course, is the fact that you are an American, the fact that you, if you're a religious person, believe in either one of the Abrahamic faiths, whether it be Christian, Muslim, or Jewish, right, Judaism, the fact that, you believe America is the greatest country that ever existed, all these ideas, it's just a matter of where you were born. You could have just as easily been born, somewhere in the Middle East and thought the same way you do about Islam as you do about Christianity. You could have been born somewhere in Asia and believe the same way about Hinduism or Buddhism as you do about Christianity, etc., right? You're constructed, these identities are constructed, and then we look in the mirror and we recognize that identity that stands before us is not the real true self that exists within us, assuming there even is a true self, as we're going to examine later in the semester, right? So again, because of this, we have replaced actual self-love, the actual love for oneself, right, with self-destruction instead, okay? And what is most painful, we say self-destruction because we recognize that the majority of us weren't socialized in a very positive way, unless you had like super great parents and lived in a super great neighborhood, and even then the chances are pretty slim, okay? We recognize that the majority of us were socialized with pretty self-destructive habits. And what's most painful about this realization is that we justify this behavior by appealing to the actions of others, okay? Now, as we'll see later on in the semester, the problem with this reasoning is that the other people that we use to justify our behavior, they're every bit as alienated and estranged from themselves as we are, okay? So this ultimately does nothing more then continue to perpetuate this vicious cycle of self-destructive behavior, okay, that inevitably becomes considered the norm, okay? I have in mind here, there's a quote-unquote dude bro, if you will, right? The toxic masculinity that's affecting American culture, right? That's going out and getting drunk on the weekend. They're saying to you, they're telling you right now, dude, the meaning of life, bro, dude, it's all about going out and getting drunk on the weekend. It's all about eating unhealthily. It's all about having meaningless sexual escapades and going to college and not even knowing why. That's just what people do, dude, bro. That's life. Now, before we continue, trust me, I'm the last person to tell you otherwise, because, unless you're in high school, in that case, no. And unless you're in college and under the age of 21, then no, you should not be doing this, right? Getting drunk on any day is illegal, okay? Eating unhealthily, I should say, come on, man, it's fun, right? Having meaningless casual sexual escapades, hey, it is what it is, right? We're humans, we're animals. Some of us, choose to do so, others don't. Whatever to each their own, right? I'm not trying to slut shame anybody by any stretch of the imagination. Okay, as far as to going to college and not even knowing why, guilty. I didn't even know why I was in college until well after I got my bachelor's degree, right? But the idea here is this is just this unreflective mode of existence is not a very conducive one to living a happy life. Ideally, the only way you can live a happy life is if you know what it is that you're doing and why you're doing something. But if you're just living unreflectively, just kind of going with the flow, well, you're going to fall victim to a lot of these negative self-destructive programming that I just mentioned. Because as awesome as eating unhealthily is, for instance, it has its negative repercussions. As awesome as getting drunk might be, it absolutely has its negative repercussions, right? Whether it be you personally, your physical health, or whether it be you affecting the lives of other people, right? As far as the meaningless casual sexual escapades, hey man, there's a scary world out there, right? You might get someone pregnant, or even worse, you might contract an illness that's going to do you in like it did my boy Nietzsche, right? And you're gonna suffer immeasurably for the rest of your life because of it, okay? So we recognize then that ideally there's probably more to life in the way that we've been socialized. And unless you've taken a step back to examine your role in this process, you're probably living that very life, and in turn living this unreflective life that, Camus and company are going to be lamenting as we progress through a semester, okay? So, in returning to Camus, he's going to argue that the fundamental needs we deprive ourselves are twofold, okay? The first of which being the need for clarity, the second of which being the need for understanding, or rather the need for social warmth and contact. I apologize. So the first one is the need for clarity and understanding. The second need that we have as humans is the need for social warmth and contact, okay? Now, again, going back to the example of the dude bro I just mentioned, we unfortunately live in a world, at least for now, okay, because this can change. There's a great line in the J. Cole song. I said, what good is taking over when you know what you gonna do? The only real revolution happens right inside of you, right? We like to lament society, for instance, but yet we never take into account the fact that society is comprised of people like you and me, okay? Anyways, but for now, it's no doubt about it that we live in a world where these simple needs are not only not met, but they're not really encouraged either, okay? I mean, just as far as truth and understanding, just look at how many blatant lies, for instance, are perpetuated, not just openly in society, but in the very classrooms that we sit in on a daily basis. I say we because I'm also a student just like you, right? But, whether it be lies of history, whether it be lies of, philosophy, there's plenty of lies in philosophy, trust me. It's just all sorts of lies that perpetuate our existence, our being, right? And furthermore, just how little we know about reality and existence in the universe in general, right? This general vagueness, it serves to, create this lack of clarity and understanding that we have about life itself, okay? Furthermore, Camus is going to want to tell us, there remains the fact that we have no sufficient reason as to why things happen in one way and not another. Now, as we progress again, on first lecture, you're probably like, what happened to syllabus day, bro? No, syllabus day, for another class, right? In this class, we're going to hit the ground running because we do not have a lot of time. And you say, it's the first day of class. No, it's still not enough time, right? He's going to want to say that, the predetermined, we're going to cover it again eventually, but there's two camps that we could take it from it. You could say it's either determinism or free will. Free will being this idea that everything that happens in your life and everything that happens in reality and existence as a whole to the human race is a direct result of their own conscientious volition, right? As opposed to determinism, which is going to want to argue that everything that happens in life happens for a reason, okay? So again, you could take the determinist route and say, no, everything does happen for a reason. But what if it doesn't? We have no reason to believe that it does, although some people will say, yeah, the universe, bro, or God, whatever the case might be. But again, different topic for a different lecture. For now, the idea is that we generally don't have sufficient reason why as to believe that things happen one way or another, okay? Now, as for human warmth and contact, Camus is going to want to tell us that we mostly live lives of we mostly live solitary existences in which relationships are more a matter of convention than they are of mutual care and understanding, right? So what I mean by this is simple. Just ask yourself, again, simply, if you're married, ask yourself why you're married. If you're in a relationship, ask yourself why you're in a relationship. And if you're not either or, ask yourself why, okay? And, ask yourself why you want to get married in the first place, or why you wanted to get married in the first place, why you wanted a boyfriend, a girlfriend, whatever the case in the first place, right? Consider then the historical forces at play that have come to define marriage in 21st century America. We're going to cover that later in the semester when we start talking a little bit more about the feminist ethics, for instance, right? Or the feminist philosophy in general. The feminist approach to philosophy, I should say. Right? We recognize that marriage in America is an institution just like many others, okay? And your ability to partake in the marriage institution, the relationship institution, whatever the case might be, your perceived level of success and happiness stands in direct relationship to your ability to fulfill this standard, okay? So what I mean by that is, for many of us, the inability to live up to these standards, these arbitrary standards, no less arbitrary in the sense that, there's really no reason as to why people should get married. It's just like someone came along thousands of years ago and said, this is what people do when they get older. They get married and live miserably for the rest of their life, or happily, whatever the case might be, right? But, for many of us, the inability to live up to these arbitrary standards frustrates our essential human needs. And again, it's not just marriage. Your inability to go to college, your unwillingness to go to college, or you're being forced to go to college, for instance, right? Arbitrary standard. Your inability to, you fill in the blank. There's so many out there that we'll be covering throughout the course of the semester, okay? We recognize that our inability to live up to these expectations, these societal expectations, they do nothing more than ultimately frustrate us and ultimately become a source for misery and despair, okay? So think about it. I wish I would have added this meme onto the PowerPoint lecture, but c'est la vie, right? Maybe it's the meme of where the guys, or this little robot, I should say. How gender exclusive am I? I apologize, ladies, okay? But it's the little robot that's looking at a wishing star flying across the sky, and it gives a wish, okay? And one of the recurring wishes that it says is, I wish I had a girlfriend, at which point the star flies away in the other direction, and the little robot on the bottom is left with like a little tear coming out of its eye, okay? And this idea like, you'll never have a girlfriend, right? So again, maybe you're miserable in a state of despair because you can't find a partner. Or maybe you're miserable in a state of misery and despair because you're in a terrible relationship and you can't find a way out, right? The only reason you're in a relationship in the first place is because people said, someone your age needs to be in a relationship, right? Or marriage, whatever the case, it's clear that these arbitrary standards may very well be nothing more than the very negative programming we were just talking about, that which keeps us from being happy. Okay? And that the only way you can ever truly achieve the understanding and the warmth that you desire is by undoing yourself from any and many of the negative connotations that you have come to be associated with them, right? Now, this, of course, requires an immense amount of work that many of us are simply unwilling to engage in, okay? Very few people, after all, are willing to admit, let alone confront how pathetic we truly are, right? I know I'm right there, right? In the list of patheticness, okay? We have the meme there of Lisa Simpson where she's just kind of staring up at the sky, at the roof of her house rather, pondering all the, the actions that she's going through in life, seeking to find some form of happiness, right? But, never really, I'm not never really, at least in the meme is concerned, because for those of you who watch The Simpsons, you recognize that Lisa's actually pretty woke for being a cartoon character, right? But you recognize that the sentiment behind that meme is this idea that, unfortunately, that for many, despite the inclination that we have to believe that ignoring our shortcomings will allow us to lead more reproductive, or rather more productive lives, okay? This does nothing more than ultimately weaken us at the end of the day. And unfortunately for many, at the end of their lives, many people go their entire lives without making a discovery that, you know, this miserable life, this quote unquote miserable life that you've been living this entire time could have been otherwise if only you'd taken the initiative to do so, right? Which is why one of the beautiful things that I think personally, just to wrap this lecture up here for today, because we're getting to about the 50-minute mark, it's one of the beautiful things about philosophy, right? At the very least, use this as an opportunity to this semester, use this class as an opportunity to do just that. Maybe you are already a fulfilled person. Maybe you are already a happy person. Who cares? Dig deeper. Examine ways in which you could be more fulfilled and more happy, right? Or maybe you're not that person who's fulfilled or happy. It's okay, right? Use this philosophy as a way to confront those demons that are keeping you, what I like to call the devils, if you will, right? Rather, it's from a Jay-Z song called "The Evils." Okay, these negative forces that are keeping you down, right? Use this as an opportunity to examine those negative forces, examine all these habits that you've been engaging in your entire life to somehow try to, you know, manage your experience of the internal world by negotiating it with your experience of the external world. Maybe you like smoke cigarettes every time you get stressed out, for instance, or maybe you have an addictive behavioral personality that, you know, that leads you to be on social media for hours on end throughout the day, meanwhile feeling entirely unfulfilled because you're doing so. Whatever the case might be, right? Use this class. Use the philosophy that we cover as a means by which to examine these issues that are keeping you from ultimately being happy, right? Because the last thing I want, genuinely, truly, honestly speaking, for the few of you that I will meet in person in the online class, and for the many of you that I undoubtedly will never see, believe me when I say that I genuinely do love y'all, and I want you to be happy. And it's my honest, sincere belief that this philosophy can help you do so, right? Or go about the rest of your life without ever confronting that reality and hopefully trying to find the happiness that it is that you desire, right? Whatever the case, my time is up for today, right? I know we covered so much in this particular introduction lecture, but you know, it's going to be par for the semester. We're going to have 3 of these every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday around this time, probably earlier, right? So you could check your Blackboard faithfully every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and you could find these lectures there waiting for you, right? My best advice is to not get far behind on them, okay? It's only 50 minutes long. Set aside the time. You have plenty of it. I'm sure you'll have, even if it's at nighttime, okay? In the morning, it doesn't matter when. Just watch the videos, because as you're going to see through the book that we have, it's not very informative, okay? The majority of the information that you're going to get from this philosophy class is going to be from the lecture, okay? Now, as far as the book is concerned, for the reading that I would like to give you all for this particular lecture, it's going to be on page 339, okay? We're going to examine why we're starting here with Camus later, like in about a week or so, right? But for now, let's just start with this section on Camus, section 14.6. It's on page, again, 339. It's only a short section. It goes to about page 341, okay? Part of it is an introduction to Camus. The rest of it details what we're going to be covering on Friday already. Wow, okay. The myth of Sisyphus, okay? So just have read up on that and you'll be ready for the lecture on Friday. But again, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is for you to keep up with these lectures, right? If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. Again, the preferred method of communication for me personally is text message. If you have to email me, of course, by all means, but just recognize that I only check Blackboard once a day. So if it's something that you really need to get a hold of me about, I'm on my phone all the time. I'm just as addicted to it as everybody else, right? So yeah, if you have any other questions, please feel free to contact me. If not, I hope you enjoyed the first of many lectures for your Introduction to Philosophy course, and I look forward to seeing you all again on Friday.